Hello world! Patricia O'Connor and Frida Darcy here. And why am I got the whole living room in the shot, and why am I tripping over light and stuff? Well, I was kind of always like that. The reason is because me and thee are sort of a tall drink of water, and that could have been for you. Let me get that for you. Are sort of a tall drink of water, and what I am referring to as thee is my Literati. I think that's kind of not facing the front. My Literati, Japanese black pine. I've had this guy almost a year, and I acquired this tree at a Bonsai Club auction, and yeah, that's about all I'm going to say about that. When I got it, it looked to me, well, when I got it, I asked if it were a white pine because I thought it looked a little pale. And when I got it home and got it in the daylight, I agreed it looked a little pale. And it did drop a few needles in the weeks after that. So one thing I started doing right after that was I fed it, and it greened up a little. Also, I was just now at a time when I was starting to get my confidence when it came time to doing a little bud selection and a little needle pruning and the like. And I knew, I think I bought this tree a year ago, like next month, actually. Because I remember thinking that I had already done the candles on my tree, and I could not see where the candles had been done on this one. And I had just taken responsibility of it, and I'm like, do I do it? Do I not do it? And I didn't really know. You know, there was a couple of things going on there that I didn't know about. I probably shouldn't have cut the candles on it, but I did. And when I did, that cut it back to almost nothing. I still hadn't fully figured that out. No, I'm pretty sure the candles hadn't been done before I got it. But they weren't really very big either. So when I cut them back to, when I cut that year's candles, that cut them back to almost nothing. It might have been a result of some needle reduction or some cleaning up that the past cultivator had done to prepare the tree for auction, right? It might have been that I'm looking at a lack of third-year needles and maybe a thinning of second-year needles or a cleaning up of the bottom, and looking at small, and it also didn't look to me like it was being fed, and that's why it looked yellow. But see, it would have been maybe yellow at that time of year because you would have cut off the fertilizer in March. I don't think that's it. I think they probably tried to keep the tree smaller by holding back on the food. And that's why the buds were small, and that's why the trunk was small and elegant and Literati-like. But the flip side to that is I couldn't see where they had cut the buds, so I cut them. And that kind of almost, to me, when I got done with it, I looked back at it and went, I'm not sure if I did the right thing, because it was almost like I cut the nails back too tight. So I let it, you know, I just kind of fell back and watched to see what would happen. And I was glad to see that nothing bad happened. And then later, we allowed the tree just to go on unimpeded for a few more months, but it had a feature that was pretty unique. This was not the apex. It had an apex that came up here and went this way. And while that was elegant, and while it did have a really nice sense of balance to it, it was also, in its origin, a bar branch that was being used as an apex. So I'm not really sure. Even after the fact, I'm not quite really sure how I felt about that. I rather like the look of it, but I did not want to see this part of the tree begin to thicken up. I thought whatever amount of time that we had gotten to enjoy that little whimsical apex, we were almost out of time where we were going to look at some large amount of reverse taper or inverse taper right here. So about 6 months ago, I did a chop there, and I did a chop on another branch that I can't, right now I can't, I don't see where I cut that other branch. I guess that's a good thing. It might have been in here somewhere. But we do have a good sense of balance, you know, with our branches trading off. And excuse me. And then later in the year, I added wire to a lot of these smaller branches, and then put a hoop in them. Just as I'm seeing, I probably need to put a little wire to this one. I was looking at the tree earlier tonight, and I was mainly concerned with how the wire was doing. I had added wire to all of these branches. It had the tag, but aside from the tag, it didn't have any wire on it when I got it. It was completely clear of wire. So the branches all had a nice hook to them, but they began, it looked to me like they were beginning to flatten out a little. So I went through and I wired all of these, and then I wired all of these, and I think we did that on a show. And then I ran out of copper wire, and then waited till later to do this. And the top, also the top looked, I was getting more confident wiring these small pieces like this as I went, but there was still some pieces up here that I wasn't fully confident in trying to bend without breaking. So yeah, I need to add wire to this branch, and I think that's all. I can see where some of this other stuff has grown a little bit, so maybe where I put a little hoop in it, and now that part's grown out, maybe I bring that around and kind of do this with the hoop, just make it deeper. Like maybe I can show you a little more of this and a little bit more of that, right? And then I go to the next one, follow suit a little bit. And this is to compensate for the fact that all of these little branches, not only is this wire still not digging in, I think we're still in good shape there, but it's still on there, it's still holding, and it's still allowing me to bend even after the branch had elongated a little bit past the hoop that I put in it. That needs to be wired, and that needs to be wired. It's not bad. So a year in, I've reduced a couple of branches on this tree. I started feeding it a little bit. We're rolling into another candle cutting season. I will nip some of the candles on this guy, and then at some point I will probably do, right after that or around that same time, a needle reduction. And what we mean by needle reduction is you basically, a pine tree wants to grow. It wants to add energy to the part of the tree where it thinks it's getting the most, or it's getting the most return. And it will put out other branches and give them a shot for a little while. But if they're a couple of years old, or they're a couple of tiers down, it's going to stop allocating as much energy to that portion of the tree. And if the tree seems to respond well to that, in other words, if allocating their energy to the top seems to bring a bigger return, then that trend will continue, and parts of your pine tree will die off as other parts of your pine tree prosper. And you can go out in the wild and see any tall, otherwise healthy pine tree and see this in motion. The lower limbs will have branches on them that are brown and dying off. For whatever reason, they're shaded by other branches and not maybe producing as much as other parts of the tree. And the tree naturally wants to put its energy in being bigger. So that's sort of why we go through and do needle reduction. I'm not necessarily, when I do that, going to pick that branch that's barely hanging in there, but I'm going to look at something that's not the strongest part of the tree, and then I'm going to kind of like do a visual image of how many needles that I'm looking at on the bud, and then I'm going to go throughout the tree and reduce it to more or less about that many needles until I get down to somewhere where I see something that might already be a weaker part of the tree, in which case, you know, messing with that further might not be the best idea. But that's kind of the idea behind that. And by doing that, by reducing the needle count up here and here, and to some extent here, to the needle count that we have in the lower portions of the tree, and then maybe reducing these a little bit and then reducing those to match, I guess is what I'm saying. By that way, the energy of the tree is more even. It doesn't feel like it can play favorites, and it will back bud in portions of the tree where it was going to try to start seeing if it could get away without it. You know, it's going to try to put a little distance between us and those limbs, and as long as we can prosper and keep doing that, then we'll just phase that out. Well, the counteract that whole process is why we do needle thinning. And then when it comes to cutting the buds every year, the reason we do that is not so much to exchange the energy, and it's not so much to get more buds, although when you cut a bud, you can, a lot of times on a healthy tree, when it comes time to do the bud cutting season, which is we're rolling into now in June, a lot of times when we do that, we will see an increase of back bud. So you had a bud there and you cut it off, and now you've got 4 buds there. And what we're going to want to do is pick 2 that are across from one another that are equal. In other words, if I've got one really, really fat, strong one, and I've got one really weak one, and I've got 2 that are about the same size, what I'm going to want to come away with, come hook or crook, are 2 buds that are about the same size. That way we can get a nice little pattern here. But they don't have to be this, because we may have started with 4, 5, or 6 buds. So the 2 that are healthiest, or maybe not the healthiest, but that are across from one another and the most uniform, they might not be across from one another like this. They might be like that. You know, we might have had 2 buds that were like this that would have naturally made that, but they weren't the ones that we wanted to select, because this one was over dominant and this one was the weakest. So we cut both of those, and then with wire, we bend it this way and give it one of those. And now those 2 buds are fairly equal size, and over the year they'll flush out, and and then we'll wire those in a year or so when they have a little bit of length to them. And through that way, we build pads, and that's the point. That's the point to doing candle cutting, is to increase the number of buds, but the main point for it is to dictate needle size. So, for instance, if it's the beginning of June, which in here in my part of California indicates that we're into candle cutting season, and this were a really big, thick empire, Japanese black pine, then we wouldn't be wanting the smallest bonsai needles. We would be wanting larger bonsai needles. maybe not as big as the trees out in the yard, but we're going to want them bigger than say on our smaller show hen trees. So for that reason, we would cut our candles at the early window of candle cutting. And what that would allow us to do is have the longest time for that second flush of candles to recover, and they would grow back longer than others. So if we have a medium-sized bonsai tree, then we would back up our candle cutting time by a week or maybe 2, because that would allow us a medium amount of time of the needle growing season for that second flush of needles to grow back. Now, if we had a show hen or a mame, something really small, and we want really, really small needles, then we're going to let June run all the way almost to the end of it. Some guys kind of wait almost into July, go a little, maybe into July a little bit. And then they go through and they cut all their candles all at once then. And that allows the least amount of recovery time for those new needles that are going to, those new buds that are, those new candles that are going to come through to grow longer needles. That they will come through and have the least amount of time and will grow the shortest needles in the time that they have, in the time they have left. So the main reason we cut candles is so that we can dictate what size we want our needles to be. Another good reason to cut candles is because it increases our back buds and it increases our bud population. But you don't always want that on a set tree. That might not be something that you're after anyway, but that's a secondary benefit. And then when it comes to the needle reduction, that is always just to balance the energy from the tree so that it doesn't decide that to be a big tree, it's going to just double the amount of needles here and kill this off. We want this to be happy and live. So at some point of the game, we're going to make sure that this has about the same amount of needles as this and this and this and this. It's a little easier to show you on the Literati because you can kind of see the relative difference in the number of needles. Now, the reason we're talking about needle reduction and all that in June and July is because this is a Japanese black pine. We would also be talking about these same tricks and traits if it were a Japanese red pine. Both of those species of pine trees are called twin flush pines. They are double flush pines. And what that means is, well, in the case of the Japanese black pine, that means that it grew up in a part of it evolved in a part of Japan where typhoons are a possibility. This thing in its natural environment back in the mother country would have a possibility of being laid bare by a tropical storm or a hurricane. And so for that reason, and notice that this candle cutting, needle pruning, needle thinning thing that we do occurs around the beginning of the hurricane season. That's because the tree can be stripped bare at that time, and I'm not a big component normally of defoliating. I don't defoliate my maples. I don't defoliate my ball cypress, but that is a practice other people do. But I do practice needle thinning when it comes to the pines because they will actually basically chew off their own arm if they think they don't need it anymore. What you want, and you want to try to do the needle reduction so that it always sees the importance in all those pieces. So there's a whole different process for single flush pines, and there's another process again for things like ponderosas, and I think they fall into the same as maybe limbers or something else. I have to know more about that. One place that's a good source of information on single flush and two flush pines would be Ryan at Bonsai Mirai did a video about 10 years ago where he taped a class where he talks about bonsai, Japanese pine or pine bonsai propagation 1 and 2, and I think 1 deals with single flush, two flush, and part 2 dealt with single flush pines. Those are both excellent programs, and you can find them on YouTube. Just remember, it was Ryan at Bonsai Mirai, and it was a part 1 and a part 2, and it was a classroom, and it was really good. It was very informative. A lot of the info I'm passing along here as to why we do needles and stuff, the basis of that I did get from him. So if you want to know where that came from, or you want to see it more for yourself, that was the source of that. Here is the spot. I just finally saw it in the dark. Here's the spot where I reduced the second limb. So I chopped it here and I chopped it here. So that pretty much changed the profile. Also, I brought it in. I thought with all the wire that we had put on it that I would probably have an opportunity to move some wire, but they're all hanging in there and looking really nice. So I just thought that, well, since we were, since we haven't really spent a lot of time with this tree since I did the last bit of work to it, this was going to be show and tell, or this was going to be us doing something. And as I looked at it, I did not really see that much to do. In fact, I didn't see this part until camera was rolling. But that's a look at our Japanese black pine literati. Probably about a 10-year-old tree, 9-year-old tree, somewhere in there. And I really love this tree. I'm really glad to see it green up. I'm really glad to see the buds come out and come back full. So yeah, I thought it could have maybe been a little greener when I got it, but it greened up nicely for me. And we made it through all these little weird winter escapades we were having and all the spring rains we had. With it did fine in there, and so I've been pretty happy with it. So that's about all I got going on. I didn't really have anything to do to this after all. I just wanted to show y'all. We haven't looked at it since we wired it and since we chopped it, and since we were knocking right on the year. I thought we would just bring it in and see if we could do something, and if we couldn't, we'd just bring it in and talk about it. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. Frida appreciates you. And our next drop will be Saturday. We will probably find something that we can at least do a little bit of work on and see what it needs and do something. But yeah, again, probably more pine work. Thank you so much for watching.